Livia from BCS, and in this video we'll be getting some insight into grad schemes. So I'm joined today by EJ, who's going to share some insight and experiences that might help you when you're considering some options for the future. So thanks for joining us, EJ. And to start off with, would you just like to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your background?
Yeah, so I studied in the University of Greenwich, and my undergrad wasn't even in computing. It was in forensic science and life sciences. And then before that, I was working in a veterinary role and in wildlife research. And I just sort of fell in love with cyber in the last year of my undergrad. But I've done mental health work with KCL. I've done all sorts of different volunteering things till I got to this point and sort of realised where I fit in. So I did my master's, and then I found my grad scheme with BT.
That's great. And so you're on the grad scheme with BT at the moment. And what was it that made you decide to go down the grad scheme route and look for that kind of opportunity?
I think that it's a nice bridge. So stepping out of education, and after I did 4 years of education, of further education, and it's quite a scary jump to suddenly be thrown into a role. And with so many places also asking for experience that you don't have time to do when you're studying full time, unless you get quite lucky with your workload. It seemed like a nice bridge into the working world, and it gives you enough like freedom to learn whilst you're working. So I get to do Microsoft certifications in Azure as part of the graduate scheme, and I get enough freedom to sort of work on what I need to get trained, work on things on my own. But then there's always somebody that you can go back to if you do get a little bit lost, and they really understand that you are just coming out of uni, and it's very different than being in education to being in the working world.
Yeah, definitely. And how did you actually go about searching for the opportunity, and how did you find it?
My university they had quite a good employability service. So as soon as you'd walk into the student services building, they had books from Grad Cracker, and you could always just book an appointment or walk into the employability office and ask them for any advice. It was through Grad Cracker that I eventually found it, but I wouldn't have known it existed as a website if it wasn't for my university suggesting it.
I see, yeah. And when you got to the sort of application and the hiring process, tell me a little bit about how that looked for you. What was kind of involved?
So this was still in the middle of work from home and lockdowns when I was applying. So it was different than what it normally would have been, where the assessment centre was virtual, the interview was a video interview, but it wasn't live. You had 3 attempts to record, so you could see the question, think on it, and then record your response to it, which was really good for me because it gives you a chance to actually consider what they're asking you in the interview part at stage 1, and actually create a response that means something. And it also means that if you're like me and you're neurodivergent, you've got time to almost like practice a couple of times before you send your final one in, and you get to be at home where or even if you're out somewhere at college or at university and you book a room at somewhere that you can be comfortable, you can control the lighting levels, you can control the noise levels, you can sit in a position that you're more comfortable in, and all these little things make it so much easier for autistic and neurodivergent people. It really opens up the access to people that normally we'd get written off in the first stage, because there's not so much of an understanding of all these little things that actually factor in hugely for us who have sensory heightened senses and sensory difficulties. And then then they did before it got to the assessment centre, stage 2 was an interactive portal, and it was across all different sort of areas of the company, and it had different exercises on it. So some of it would be around data analysis, some of it would be around creative marketing, some of it would be around contingency planning, and it just sort of assessed your fit. And it wasn't about getting 100 out of 100. It was about how well you did and how thoughtful your responses were. And yeah, it's good that if you do sort of get the numerical questions and things like that right, but the more creative assessments, it's just getting a feel for you without doing something like a personality test, which again doesn't really factor in neurodivergency. They don't work. They don't really work for us because standardized testing in general doesn't really work for us.
Yeah,
Then the assessments.
absolutely. How?
And
Yeah, I
then,
was going to say, how about the assessment centre?
yeah, and the virtual assessment center was great. It was hosted on one of their own sites, and you were given tasks to do either as a whole group or individual. And then between each of the sort of sessions of the assessment center, there was a breakout room, and they were grad buddies. So there were people who were either on the graduate scheme or who were rolling off of it, and this was their last like few months. And you could just talk to them. It wasn't recorded or anything like that. It was just a space for you to go and ask the graduates, well, what's it like being there? Am I going to be on my own? What's it like moving? Because one of the stipulations for joining whichever sector you joined in is you had to relocate as soon as you were able to after you got accepted in. So asking them things like that, even things like who's a good estate agent in the area? I've never been there before, or how much does it cost to get into the office? How much are you going in? So that really helped relax, I think, a lot of people. It definitely helped me out because all of these sorts of questions can be a bit intimidating to ask an interviewer that. So if you've got other people that are sort of your age who have also just come out of uni or who have not long been out of uni and have had worked all that out, it was quite comfortable.
Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, definitely to be able to speak to people who've been in that position before is probably quite reassuring to be able to get a picture in your mind of some of that, how the logistics of that stuff's going to work as well, because it is really important. Relocating for a role is a massive change in your life. You're coming out of education and you're changing literally everything about your day-to-day life.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's a big step. Yeah, definitely. And earlier on you mentioned about the grad scheme being like a bridge between like full-time work and education. So I wanted to ask you about how I guess the grad scheme differs from a regular job in terms of perhaps the range of projects that you work on and the support you get and that kind of thing.
I think there's a lot more support and there's a lot more flexibility than having a predefined set of work. So in my CFU, there's multiple sort of applications and projects that we manage as a team, as a whole CFU, but you get a chance to sort of get involved with everything. Whereas typically it might be you're designated to one or two teams, but being a grad, I get to go to my line manager and go, oh, the team that works on the other desk in the office, I had a chat with them at lunch and they're working on some machine learning stuff. Can I go and shadow them for a couple of days a week? And so you get to do those sorts of things and really work out where do you want to go after the grad scheme, and it helps you get that experience to make an informed decision before you commit to sort of one smaller part of the sector for a longer period of time. But it's quite fluid. I think in BT anyway, there are people who were on technology who have moved into HR. There are people who are in HR who have moved across into digital. There are people in digital who have moved into technology. So even when you're not on a grad scheme, you've got those opportunities, but being on the grad scheme, it gives you more time to get involved in different things that you might not really have the time for when you're working on a permanent contract. And people understand that you're a student or you weren't a student long ago. You're going to need a bit more support to start out with than you would if you'd been a working professional and you'd moved into there from another company.
Yeah, that's it. And there's so many different options, especially in a company like BT, a huge organization. So to be able to try different avenues and explore them is really valuable. I was going to ask you about like specifically for you, what sort of opportunities and different things you've been able to access through the scheme.
I've been doing a lot around Azure, which it's wonderful that we've got partnership with them. So I'm doing my exam on the 7th of March as of to the AZ700, which is network architecture. And it was 3 full days of training by one of the Microsoft experts. And that would normally come to well over £500 just for the training days, not even the exam. So you get to do that, and work will pay for you to do it because they know if they invest in you to go away and do these certifications, and then you bring that back in, it's good for them as well. And we get access to, you can apply for a Pluralsight license, so you can do your own learning. We have access to LinkedIn Learning, and I have a meeting with my line manager every month or so, and we set quarterly goals. So one of my goals is to do this AZ700 exam, but we also make a list of, okay, these are the learning you can do on Pluralsight. This one will be useful for you. Let's check in a couple of weeks, or we say, okay, so you've got this, this, and this that you're doing for work this week. So how about we make Wednesday afternoon your learning day, which you wouldn't normally get to do because you'd be so inundated with project work. It gives you the time to get those learning foundations in.
Yeah, that's great. And with that sort of, like we were talking about the transition from education to work, and it is a sort of big change, especially relocating and stuff like that. I wanted to ask you about the sort of the challenges of that transition and also the things you've enjoyed about it.
I just enjoy learning anyway, and I've always sort of thrown myself into the deep end of things because I think that's the best way for me to learn. So they sort of go together. I enjoy the challenge because if I'm challenged, I'm learning something. And I know it might not be the same for other people. There's all different learning styles, but that definitely worked for me. And my line manager knows that, so he's quite happy to sort of throw some things that need sorting out at me and give me a chance to try and figure it out for myself. But reassuring me that if I do get really stuck on something, he's just a Teams message away or an email, and he'll make time and and make some time to go through me. Or any of the other application leaders that I work with on the different teams will do that. But they do give you a chance just to try yourself first and challenge. As long as you're challenging yourself, then my manager seems quite happy with us.
That sounds good. And then I just got the last question really for you was about what sort of advice you might give to people who are considering applying for a grad scheme, or if there's anything that you wish you would go back and tell yourself when you were in that position.
Don't be scared to. It's really scary, and you think that especially for such a massive company, you think I'm going up against thousands and thousands of other people, but you just sort of have to and apply to as many as possible because it's really tough competition. There's a lot of competition among graduates now to get into something, even if it's not a grad scheme, even if it's just straight into a permanent contract somewhere. You just have to apply to as many as possible and be just really genuine, because the worst thing is acting how you think you're supposed to act, and then the mask will slip after a couple of months and you'll realize that you're not a good fit, or one of your managers will realize that actually you don't gel with the team so well, and you'll have to leave. And instead of putting all that effort into pretending to be that you're somebody that you're not. You could put that effort into actually just going and finding a company that you do think you gel better with, and comes it will come across, if you're not genuine most of the time anyway, to somebody who's interviewing you. But also, do you really want to work somewhere that they don't accept you for who you are? So you're doing yourself a service by just being genuine and being who you are when you're talking to them. And look at equality policies. One of the first things that I do when I'm looking at any company to join is looking at what their equality policies are. Do the people who email put pronouns in their emails? Do they have a equality charter? Do they have a disabled staff network? Do they have a network for carers? What's their annual leave like? Do they do charity work? All of these other things that sort of go under the radar. People say, okay, well, how big is the company and how much money I'm going to make? Those aren't actually that important, because you can always find money from somewhere. It might not be a lot. It might be that you just have to, you have to sell some stuff that you don't want on eBay to get by, but you can always sort of find that. But what you can't just find out of nowhere is people that are actually going to look after you whilst you're there, and that you're actually going to want to get up and go to work every day and actually enjoy going to work every day. That's far more important than how much you're going to work.
I think that's one of the best pieces of advice I've heard in a long time. And I think you're right. Being able to be your authentic self at work is so important, because we spend a lot of time at work.
Exactly.
So if
Yeah.
you can't be, it's a hard act to keep up for a lot of hours of the day. And absolutely finding an organization that you feel proud to work for, that you feel like their values are aligned to your personal values, and you want to give everything you've got into that organization and into that role, and to help your colleagues who you feel like you belong with, is so important. Yeah.
And just know that you're doing something that I know most of us aren't going to be remembered by the world. We're just not we're not all Nobel Prize winners, but we'll be remembered by our communities, and we'll be remembered by the people that we see every day, and we'll leave some kind of mark on the world when we leave it. And do you want to leave a positive mark or not? Like, I'm really proud to work for BT, because we're doing all sorts of research into assistive technologies and like house mapping via your phone for people who are losing their eyesight, and looking at live captioning and computer vision and all these sorts of things that we're integrating with it. They're doing volunteering days, so in addition to your annual leave, you get 3 days paid extra to that to go and volunteer for something that you care about. All of those things, like, there's more than just going into the office, being there for 6, 7, 8 hours and then going home. There needs to be more than that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, EJ. That was a really great insight from you, and I really appreciate you for sharing that with us.
No worries.
Thank you.